I'd hoped to make some cool 50cc videos, but I've had my stuff in powder coat for a month now. The guy's machine broke, everything went wrong, I don't know. But I'm gonna do a wiring video since I've been playing with this wiring. It's all simple stuff, and it looks really simple when laid out in the meth lab. But when you get up here and try to do it in real life, it gets super confusing with all the different wires. So hopefully this will help some of you guys that are like me and wiring illiterate. It's fun to add all these electrical accessories to your bikes. You know, big ass LED headlight, speedometers that light up, underglow lighting, that comes on. We got nitrous, that takes electricity. Big speaker right there takes electricity. Aftermarket tail lights and brake lights. Easy to make mistakes when you wire this stuff up. If you're kind of new to wiring stuff, hopefully this will help. Car guys tend to think positive, negative. House guys think positive, neutral. But with your Maddog, you need to think positive, and then your green wire will be negative. Now your accessories you buy, they're gonna come probably positive red, negative black.
Wow, it's amazing!
So this little LED light will represent all our accessories. It could be a stereo, could be an LED light, could be hand warmers, doesn't matter. It's got a positive and a negative on it. 12 volt DC. Switches come in all forms and fashion. We'll let this represent our switch. An old momentary push switch. So when that thing's up, we know it's off. We can't get confused. When it's pushed, it's on, which is like this handlebar switch, on and off. We're back in our Florida meth lab here. We've got a negative wire will be white and positive wire will be black. And here's our accessory. Could be anything. This time it's a light. Positive wires red and negative wires black on our accessory. We hook it to our Maddog, we tap into our black wire and our green wire, and look, the light comes on. Pretty simple.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
This negative wire and this positive wire go to your accessory, negative and positive wire. This switch is just an extension, just another wire. So here I've got the negative always hooked up to the negative. I've tapped into the bike somewhere. I'll show you where to tap into those. You'll notice a green wire, big fat one, going to your engine right here. That's your main ground. It also grounds to the frame just via the mounting. So you can either tap into a ground, or you can take a shortcut and just ground nearby where the accessory is. Good places to ground are like this bolt here. This box is actually grounded. You can ground to these kind of bolts here. You don't want to ground to a painted surface. But if the threads go through a hole like this, generally the threads inside this hole are not painted, they're cut, so you usually get a pretty good ground. This would probably work as a good ground right here. And to add a ground, you'd put one of these little loops on the end of your wire. You can see I did that right here with the fuel pump. I didn't want to run a ground wire all the way from the front, so I just took the ground and shortcutted it and put it right to the frame here. Now I've accessed a positive wire on the Maddog. I'll show you where to tap into those. Red wires are positive. This thick red wire is going to go to the starter relay. The battery goes into right here on this side. These are just metal posts. Another thick wire exits here, and it'll go eventually down here to send power to your starter. That's a real thick wire, because if it was any thinner, it would melt, it would burn up. But that's the only two places you'll find those thick wires. The relay is energized when the starter button's pushed. When you push the starter button, juice is coming in from the battery on one of these little wires, and then it's exiting out one of the other wires and goes to the relay. It energizes the relay. Inside the relay there's like a metal wafer, so it's an electromagnetic coil. The little wafer comes up, it touches these two contacts, and sends power directly from the battery directly to the starter. The other red wire you see coming out of your battery is this one with a protected fuse. Now this wire here is hot always. It's connected right to the battery. So when you see your solid red wires like this, always 12 volt. Whether the key's on, taken out, bike's parked, doesn't matter. Here's another solid red wire coming through right here. You're always going to have 12 volt on that. Another solid red wire right here. These green wires are usually ground, solid green. That solid red wire goes into here somewhere, comes back out, goes through your key switch. Turning the key switch on sends 12 volt to these solid black wires. There's a lot of them. That's a great place to pick up for your accessories that you want to come on when the key's on, like headlights, things like that. But if you want to have a stereo that's just switched on, you don't have to have your key on to listen to the radio. You could put it on the red wire. You'd have your bike parked, key in your pocket, and still listen to your stereo as long as you turned it on. So I turn the key on, the running lights do not come on. Nothing comes on. Only the brake light works and the blinkers. So this does not have 12 volt keyed on DC coming back to the rear of the bike. This bike here, however, when I turned it on, the running lights come on. So I've got 12 volt heat on DC coming back to this bike. But I found the Gen 4s and Gen 1s don't have the DC 12 volts coming back to the bike. So if you want 12 volt, you need to tap into it. And I use this white wire here just because it matches the color of the bike. And I just bring it back here, and here's where I've tapped in for the electric fuel pump. And I just use one of these connectors like this, tap into that solid black wire. That's my keyed on wire. These things here to put two wires together and bring a tap off a wire. Makes connecting easy. Anytime you see a solid yellow wire like this one, this is usually the 12 volt AC coming directly out of your stator. Should be one here going into the rectifier to convert this to 12 volt and then regulate it. So that's your 12 volt AC taps. We're not really going to ever use those, but you will find that 12 volt AC going back to your rear for your running lights. Don't tap into that. Here it is right here. There's no solid black wire. We have no 12 volt DC coming back here. The only 12 volt DC we do have coming back here is for the brake light and the blinkers, which do us no good because those would only be activated when the switch control is activated. When I touch that positive wire, this wire doesn't have to go to the battery, remember, it can just be part of your wiring system. The light will come on. When I remove the two wires, the light goes off. That's all the switch does. It's just doing this right here, opening and closing those wires. You can hook it to either side. I could do the same thing with the negative. Here the positive is hooked together permanently, and I'm going to use the negative side as the switch. It still works. It's just kind of a wiring standard. We usually run the switch through the positive side. So we're going to add our switch into this wire loop. Just like that, just an extension, just so we can disconnect and connect that wire easily. So now we have the switch extending the positive wire. This is tapped into the bike somewhere. Now when I press the switch, the light comes on. So that's pretty easy to figure out. The mistake I see most with switches, and people think that the negative and positive go to the switch. Now, where does your device go? Well, it goes to the negative and positive. Negative and positive, and this switch is just gonna be on all the time. When I press that button and turn the switch on, I'm gonna connect the negative and positive of that battery terminal and short circuit everything, including this light. Because if that switch were to be activated, it would touch this wire to this wire, and we would get a spark. And it would short circuit stuff and overheat it and burn the wire. To prevent us from damaging the system, we have fuses, not a positive and a negative, in line. This fuse is basically just like your wire. It's a piece of the wire right in here. Positive and negative does not hit that. No matter how strong this fuse is, if you put a positive and a negative to it, it will blow up. But that's what we're gonna hope happens. We're gonna hope it blows up and we hook our wiring up wrong. Fuses come in big thick ones, they come in little skinny ones to protect different sized devices, because some devices may have little tiny wires. There's all sorts of fuses. There's Volkswagen fuses, little wire strips on them. There's big fuses for brake systems on trucks. So we've now got the system wired wrong. This is the mistake we made inside the dash somewhere. So we've got a fuse in here protecting it. When I press this button, I'm going to short circuit the system and something's gonna blow. There it went. You see the fuse blow? The fuse blew out and saved that light. Right now, these two wires are not connected because that fuse blew out. If we connect these wires again, by putting a new fuse in there, the light should work again. So we dump the fuse and we connect the wires and the light comes back on. So the light was protected by the fuse. But now what happens if we press the button now with no fuse in the system? And this is why your Maddog fuse is way up here.
Who are you, who are so wise in the ways of science?
So all the screwing up you do over here, you're gonna protect it with that fuse. But now we've somehow tapped into that battery wire that goes to the start relay. We really have no protection on this thing at all. And we press the button and we're wired wrong. What's gonna happen? Whoa, look at there. See that? That wire started melting right away, but your wire started melting. Your wire became a fuse and it's gonna burn up. That will cause a fire under your battery cowling as you're driving down the road. So we went on eBay and we found this badass light. We want to put it on the front of our Maddog. Look how big the wires are on this thing. That's probably an indicator that it needs a bigger wire. It's because it's drawing a lot of battery amperage. Here's a big wire. I could use that to connect this, but eventually you're going to get to a small wire. Eventually a wire is going to be too small. It's going to be like your Maddog wire. It's going to be this size. And when you're hooking that big of a wire to this big of a wire, you're probably going to overstress this wire and it's going to melt. We've got our big ass light bar wired up. We got negative going to negative for the battery. We've got positive going to the battery eventually through all our stuff in our dash we've tapped in somewhere. we've got a switch installed on the positive side. So we're going to turn it on and see what happens. See how this baby looks. Press the button. Oh, hell yeah. That looks nice. Now we can go driving down the road. There seems to be a problem though. I've exaggerated this with these little teeny wires. These little teeny wires are getting, they're getting super hot. Those little teeny wires are going to catch on fire eventually. This is why when you see big wires like this, you need to use a relay, because your little wires, that one's getting warm. This is a relay. You start getting into the thick wires, because if you try to run some things off a little teeny wire from your switch, it'll just melt the switch and melt the wire, and you'll end up with a wire that looks like this. You see someone's tried to repair this one. It's been fried. When you get into your thicker wires that take a lot of power, they will overheat and fry on you. So you'll want to put a relay in there. What confuses people about relays is we don't have to go back to the battery with our ground. The battery is probably grounded to the frame somewhere, which in the Maddog's case is grounded to the engine. So the ground on our relay will just go to the frame somewhere, not the ground to the device. This is the ground to the device. Now let's say this fuel pump took a lot of power and needed a relay. It really doesn't, but let's say it did. Then you would just ground this to the frame somewhere. You would ground your relay to the frame somewhere. These two don't have to be connected. That's not how a switch works. This is a switch. This ground is only allowing the relay to work. Ground is not transferring ground to the ground on the device. It is transferring 12 volt DC to 12 volt DC on the device. It is not transferring ground. So we have the relay grounded so the relay can work. That one doesn't count. We have the device grounded so the device can work. We're not going to mess with that one. That leaves us 3 wires on our relay and a wire on the device. This big fat red wire is going to pull battery volts into here. So that's going to go to our battery. That leaves the red wire from the device, the hot wire, and this is going to be the exiting hot from the battery. Once this is activated, it's going to make this wire go to that wire. So these 2 wires would go together. That leaves us 1 wire, the blue wire. This is your switch. So this is where your switch would go. Do not pay attention to switch wire colors. Why people melt wires and burn things up is they think these are positive and negative. They're not. This is 1 wire. Just think of a switch as 1 wire. And it breaks the wire and connects the wire. So anyway, your trigger switch would go to your switch. Then this side of the switch goes to the battery. So when you turn your switch on, it sends juice from the battery into the switch. It was already there. The switch allows it to come out the other side of the wire into the blue wire. The blue wire energizes the relay. The relay compresses inside. These 2 wires touch. It sends juice directly from the battery to that white wire and into your device. This is how your starter works. Every time you hit the starter, this would be your starter button, that would be your starter, and that would be your relay. A lot of guys call it a solenoid, but it's a relay. These little wires are exaggerated, but if you're using big wires like on your powered subwoofers and your big lights and things like that, your Maddog wires now become the littlest wires in the system. So if I keep that on long enough, we're gonna, oh, there it goes, we're gonna start smoking them. They're gonna melt. You see them just starting to burn up. If you're putting something really big on, like a powered speaker, they have basically like an amplified subwoofer that gets its power from the battery also. The amp is built in. They'll have a really big thick wire. Look how thick that wire is going from it. So it'll come with the wiring kit, or you may have to buy a wiring kit, but it's worth it. It seems like it makes the wiring more difficult, but it's actually worth it. You'll see these wiring kits online for putting your LED lights on. You're like, ah, it's too confusing. But it actually has all the good stuff on it. The wiring kit will come with your switch. The switch will go to the battery. It'll take the skinny wires from the battery and bring power into a relay. The amp draw becomes so high on these big items that they just start melting. Just like we talked about before. The relay will take the power from the skinny wires and put it into these big wires. Part of the big wires go to the battery, these ones here, and look what it has in there, a fuse in line. You hook those to the battery, has a fuse in line, then that power goes to the lights or stereo, whatever you're doing. That's a pretty good deal to get these wiring harnesses. They're super cheap. I see a lot of guys running their LED light, like this little bar light here, and they'll run it directly to the battery via a switch. Turn it on, it comes on, bikes off. So that's hardwired to the battery. That's a fine wiring method, but let's say the wire you ran to that light rubbed against something sharp like this. and over enough vibration and time and bumpy roads, it wore through, and you got bare wires contacting here. When that rubs through, you now have a ground touching a hot, and you get a short circuit that can melt your wires, cause a fire, do all sorts of damage. So you want to have a fuse in there. If you run these wires direct to your battery, put a fuse in it, and they sell them. They're real cheap. It's like an inline fuse like this. Then whenever that thing shorts out, or you make a mistake and wire it wrong, you blow this fuse and you don't melt your wires.
Trust me, I'm like a smart person.